First of all, I would like to wish everyone a good evening.
大家講午安。
I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to come here and to think about the Dharma, to listen to Dharma teachings and think about the Dharma. I'd like to say that you aren't wasting your time, but maybe I feel a little bit prideful saying that. It's not because of me, but because of doing the Dharma. This is a good thing to do with yourself. So whether I'm wasting your time or not, at least your intention is a good one.
咁上司話再次咧好多謝大家星期一咧嚟聽聞呢個佛法。咁佢話佢覺得佢好似喺度嘥緊大家嘅時間，但係其實唔係，因為佢係為咗佛法而去做。
And so we will start tonight, as usual, with the Vajradhara lineage prayer.
咁我哋開始大家一齊念呢個大手印祈請文金剛總持咒。
I haven't said much about it when we've recited it on other times. And sometimes it's easy to just think, oh, I have to recite this, and recite it without thinking about it. Really, what the Vajradhara lineage prayer does gives us all of the names of the people who brought the teachings to us, who found the teachings in India, brought them to Tibet, then passed them down. And then there are the 4 verses that give the essential instructions that we can think about how to have renunciation for this life, devotion for the lamas, and practice meditation. And so, reciting this, it's important to think about the meaning of the words to whatever extent you're able, obviously, as we recite in Tibetan. Think about the meaning of the words as you recite, and please to try to recite this with a pure intention.
咁上次嘅開始咧就係話，每一次我哋都要念呢個金剛總持讚，但係好多時我哋念，究竟我哋有冇真正去諗過，其實佢個內容係咩咧？咁其實金剛總持讚裏邊咧，亦都係包含咗所有我哋家主傳承嘅教授，裏邊亦都有提所有嘅祖師，由印度開始，直至到去到西藏，跟住再一路流傳落嚟。咁其實裏邊亦都有講大手印嗰4種修持嘅方法究竟係點？咁雖然大家係用藏文咧去念誦呢個金剛總持讚，但係希望大家真正去諗下佢嘅內容同埋佢嘅意思。
Now please think to yourself that it is for the benefit of all sentient beings, all of our mothers who are as numerous as space is limitless. Think that it is for their benefit that we need to achieve Buddhahood. And in order to achieve Buddhahood, we first need to listen to, contemplate, and study the Dharma.
咁首先咧就係話，當我哋去每一次去聽聞佛法之後咧，首先就係諗你自己係為咗無量嘅如母嘅有情眾生而嚟聽呢個佛法。從聽聞佛法咧，直至到我哋成佛咧，我哋都係為咗要去度無量嘅眾生。
And so think that it is for that purpose that you are taking these teachings tonight. And the Dharma that we are listening to tonight is a teaching on the 3 vows.
首先咧，我哋要搞清楚我哋嚟嘅動機咧，就係為咗聽聞佛法。
The 3 vows, there are the 3 levels of vows. There is the external vow of individual liberation, the internal vow of the Bodhisattva, and the secret vow of the secret mantra Vajrayana. So these are the 3 levels of vows, the 3 types of vows that we can take.
首先咧，我哋嚟聽聞呢個3種嘅戒律咧。首先第一種已經講過，就係呢個別解脫戒；第二咧就係呢個菩薩戒；第3種咧就係我哋呢個密乘戒。
And so for the first we have 4 weeks. In the first 2 weeks, we spent primarily talking about the first level of vow, the vows of individual liberation. They're external vows of individual liberation, which means they're primarily concerned with refraining from bad actions with our body and speech, refraining from doing things on the outside.
咁其實有4個原因咧，我哋要去聽呢個戒。第一種就係呢個別解脫戒，我哋已經講過啦。咁第二種戒咧就係話要防止我哋嘅身口意出現任何嘅唔好嘅惡業。
And so we primarily spoke about the vows that are most appropriate for lay people, the vows of the fasting vows and the upasaka or the lay precepts.
咁首先我哋亦都講過居士嘅8關齋戒啦，同埋呢個5戒。
Now, holding these vows of individual liberation is very important for many reasons. The main reason is because this is the best way to free yourself from samsara.
我哋接受呢個別解脫戒咧，最主要嘅原因咧就係令我哋可以從輪迴中得到解脫。
And if you take them with the attitude of bodhicitta, that is, if you take the vows of individual liberation with the attitude, with the wish that you want to free all sentient beings from samsara, then they also become Mahayana vows.
咁如果我哋受呢啲戒咧，係以一個菩提心為基礎咧，諗住係為咗利益無量個眾生咧，咁呢個就變咗大乘嘅戒律。
And so these vows are like the support for all the rest of our practice. As I mentioned the first week, the vows of individual liberation are like a bowl, and then the vows of the bodhisattva are like the water that is within the bowl.
咁呢啲戒咧，其實咧就係支持我哋喺任何嘅佛法修持上，咁亦都係等於好似一個碗同埋入裏邊嘅水咁樣。
So what are these vows of the bodhisattva then? That's the second level of vows, the bodhisattva vow.
咁第二個層次咧就係呢個菩薩戒。
In some ways, talking about the bodhisattva vow, there aren't as many different types. You don't have all, the 4 different types. Like individual liberation, you have 4 different types of individual liberation vows, and then the 8 precepts, and then 5 precepts, and you can take any number. Then you have the monastic vows, and you've got the shikshamanera vows, and all these other different types of vows. So there's a lot in the individual liberation vows.
咁首先菩薩戒就唔似好似別解脫戒咁，因為別解脫戒裏邊咧，我哋分別係有呢個5戒啦，亦都係八關齋戒啦，就係三昧戒、三昧尼戒、比丘戒同比丘尼戒。
If you think about the mantra vows that we'll talk about next week, then they're also very bewildering. There are 4 classes of tantra, each of which have their own different types of vows, and then every tantra explains the vows slightly differently. It can get very confusing. But the bodhisattva vow is much simpler in one respect, or in that respect.
咁下個禮拜咧，我哋就會講4種密續裏邊嘅戒，即係4部瑜伽裏邊嘅行部、事部、瑜伽部同無上瑜伽部嘅戒。咁其實咧裏邊咧係比較複雜，同埋係令我哋難明。今日咧，我哋首先就要講呢個菩薩戒係比較簡單好多。
And the reason it's simpler is basically you've got 2 different aspects of the vow. You've got the vow of aspiration and the vow of engaged bodhicitta.
咁最主要咧，佢哋係分為2部分，就係願菩提心同埋行菩提心。
But before we can think about the bodhisattva vow, we first have to actually think about, well, what is bodhicitta?
首先我哋要搞清楚乜嘢係菩提心咧。
So, what is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is basically, on its most essential level, it's really the focus on enlightenment. Wanting, on a relative level, this is wanting to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings.
咁其實菩提心咧就係話，我哋要成就佛陀嘅果位，就係因為我哋要救到無量嘅眾生。
On an ultimate level, it is the wisdom that perceives the nature of all phenomena. So there are these 2 aspects of bodhicitta. There's the relative, the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and the ultimate, which is the direct perception of the nature of all phenomena.
菩提心咧，基本上咧就分為2種，一種咧就叫做相對嘅菩提心，同埋一種叫做聖義嘅菩提心。
In terms of the Mahayana path, it takes a while to get to the ultimate bodhicitta. So we start training in relative bodhicitta.
要達到呢個聖義菩提心咧，係非常之有難度嘅。咁首先我哋要從相對菩提心開始。
When you think about it, bodhicitta is actually the source of everything good in the world.
咁其實菩提心咧，即係正如《梵網經》所講，菩提心係諸佛嘅根本源，亦都係菩薩嘅根本。
And the reason we can say this is if you think about what does our happiness come from? Well, our happiness comes from behaving well, being good, not doing anything that harms anyone.
其實首先我哋要明白，究竟我哋嘅快樂喺邊度嚟咧？其實我哋嘅快樂嚟自咧係做一個好人，同埋唔好傷害任何嘅眾生。
The essence of not harming anyone is the Dharma.
咁佛法嘅精華部分咧，就係話我哋唔會傷害任何嘅眾生。
All of the results that come from the Dharma, such as people who become arhats, where does that come from?
我哋要明白所有嘅果喺邊度嚟咧？例如一個人已經證咗呢個阿羅漢，咁其實佢係從何得到而嚟咧？
All of that comes from the Buddha.
其實所有嘢都係嚟自佛陀。
So the Dharma, all of the results of the Dharma all come from the Buddha because the Buddha appeared in the world, he taught the Dharma, and people were able to practice the Dharma.
其實所有嘅結果都係嚟自佛陀，因為佛陀降世喺我哋呢個世界，亦都為我哋說法而將佛法流傳到而家。
But what did the Buddha come out of? Where did the Buddha come from?
From a human being. 咁佛陀究竟係點樣嚟嘅咧
The Buddha comes out of the bodhisattvas. You have to have the bodhisattva then, practices the bodhisattva path until he or she becomes a Buddha, right?
咁佛陀係從修持呢個菩提心，從行呢個菩薩道，而最終係成佛。
But what does a bodhisattva come from?
咁菩薩又喺邊度嚟呢？
A bodhisattva comes out of bodhicitta.
咁菩薩就係喺菩提心嗰度嚟。
So this bodhicitta is the cause of a bodhisattva, which is a cause of the Buddha, which is a cause of the Dharma, which brings happiness to the world.
咁其實菩提心就係一切佛陀菩薩同埋一切眾生嘅利樂嘅根本。
So bodhicitta is very important for the world as a whole. It's also very important for us as individuals.
咁其實菩提心唔單止令到對整個世界都有利益，甚至乎對我哋自己都係有好大嘅利益。
It's important because when we develop bodhicitta, then we also begin to go along the path that will bring us to happiness as well.
咁非常重要一點就係話，當我哋能夠發展我哋嘅菩提心咧，最終亦都能夠為我哋都帶嚟快樂。
So, 3 uncountable eons ago, the previous incarnation of the Shakyamuni Buddha developed bodhicitta. He developed bodhicitta. Our previous incarnations from 3 uncountable eons ago did not.
首先我哋明白佛陀咧喺三劫之前咧已經係行呢個菩薩道，而佢最終成佛。但係我哋喺過去呢三劫，我哋有冇做到咧？
And so now, the Buddha awoke to Buddhahood, and we're still ordinary people.
三個阿僧祇劫之後，佛陀已經成佛，但係我哋仍然都仲係一個凡夫。
And so what is the reason for that? The reason is the Buddha developed bodhicitta. We did not.
咁其實嗰個問題喺邊度嚟咧？就係佛陀有行過菩薩道，有發過菩提心，而我哋沒有。
But there's no need to worry about that. That's all the past, because now we have the opportunity to develop bodhicitta in this lifetime.
咁其實我哋亦都大家唔需要介懷，因為已經係過去嘅事。最重要嘅一點就係話，從而家開始，我哋建立我哋嘅菩提心。
And bodhicitta is a wonderful thing. It's helpful for us in this lifetime. It will be helpful for us in all of our future lifetimes, and it will eventually bring us to the greatest of results.
咁菩提心咧係唔單止令我哋呢一世會得到利益，甚至乎未來世都可以得到利益，而最終咧係令到我哋可以成就呢個佛國。
It's like we have a choice at this point what we can do. You can do any regular virtuous thing you do is like the seed of a banana tree. When you plant the seed of a banana tree, it grows and it gives fruit. It gives lots of bananas once.
咁其實我哋亦都係有選擇。咁如果喺一般嘅層次嚟講咧，就係等於我哋可以種一棵香蕉嘅樹。咁呢棵香蕉嘅樹最終會開花結果一次。
But bodhicitta is a seed that if you plant bodhicitta, then this will bring you joys and happiness forever. It will keep on giving result after result, just like a wish-fulfilling tree.
咁菩提心咧就係唔單止令我哋可以一次得到呢個快樂同埋喜悅，係會延續咁一路咁去蔓延，就係等於一棵滿園嘅樹。
The wish-fulfilling tree is the tree in the heaven of the 33, where the gods can go and just pick anything they want off the branches of the tree. If they want fruit, there's fruit. If there's cappuccino, if they want cappuccino, they can get cappuccino. If they want an iPhone, they get an iPhone off the tree, the wish-fulfilling tree.
咁其實呢棵滿園樹咧，就係其實係喺我哋33天嘅天宮裏邊。咁所有啲天人咧，當佢哋行到呢棵樹咧，佢哋起心動念咧。如果佢哋要想食物啊，要 iPhone 啊，要飲 cappuccino 咧，只要佢哋起心動念咧，棵樹咧就馬上會俾佢哋。
So when we develop bodhicitta, there are 2 different aspects to relative bodhicitta. The first of these aspects is what we call aspirational bodhicitta.
咁我哋要去發展我哋菩提心，其實係分開2個部分。第一咧就係叫做願菩提心。
And the second is what we call engaged bodhicitta.
咁第二咧就係行菩提心。
So these are the 2 parts, aspirational bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta.
兩樣就係願菩提心，發願嗰個願，行菩提心，行動嗰個行。
So aspirational bodhicitta is the wish. I want to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings.
咁願菩提心咧就係自己一個心願，就係話我要成佛，因為我要利樂無量嘅有情眾生。
And then engaged bodhicitta is actually doing something to achieve that.
咁行道菩提心就係話我哋真係以實際嘅行動去利益眾生。
And that something that we have to do is the practice of the 6 paramitas.
咁我哋要去做嘅呢，其實就係我哋要行持呢個六度波羅蜜。
But first of all, we have to think about, okay, aspirational bodhicitta is the wish to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of others. Well, what does achieving Buddhahood really mean?
咁究竟願菩提心話我哋要去成就佛果，究竟係代表啲乜嘢呢？
Buddhahood just means really achieving lasting happiness for yourself. And along with that lasting happiness, it means understanding how to help other beings also come to lasting happiness.
成就佛陀嘅果位就係話，除咗我哋得到永遠嘅快樂、離苦得樂之外呢，我哋亦都要盡量幫助其他嘅眾生，令到佢哋離苦得樂。
So aspirational bodhicitta is really just the wish to make ourselves and all other sentient beings happy.
咁願菩提心呢，就係其實嘅作用呢，就係有一個自利利他嘅作用，就係希望自己同埋所有嘅眾生都能夠離苦得樂。
Now, aspirational bodhicitta is like wanting to do this, but engaged bodhicitta is actually going and trying to do it.
咁願菩提心呢，就係話我哋個心想去咁做，而喺呢個行菩提心就係話我哋想，然後我哋真正要付諸行動去實行。
And so the difference between the two is said in the way of the Bodhisattva. It is said that wanting to go and going, this is how the wise distinguish the two.
呢兩樣嘢呢，就係對一個菩薩嚟講就係話我想做而又去做。
So like aspirational bodhicitta is wanting to go.
咁願菩提心就係話想去做。
And this is very important because if you don't want to go anywhere, you won't get anywhere.
咁首先呢個係非常之重要，因為如果你唔想去一笪地方，你係唔會去。
You might decide, oh, I want to go see Rinpoche's monastery in Namo Buddha, and you have the strong wish, and you make the commitment, I want to go see this.
咁舉個例子就係話，我希望去到藏古寧波車南無布達嘅寺院度，首先你個心係要想去咁做。
But you won't get there unless you actually go out, buy the airplane ticket, get on the airplane, get to Kathmandu, rent a taxi, and go to Namo Buddha.
你單係想係唔會令到佢實現。首先我哋就話，如果我哋想去南無布達，首先我哋要去買機票啦，跟住飛去尼泊爾，跟住去咗加德滿都揾架的士，然後車我哋去。
So that's the difference, the aspirational and the engaged bodhicitta. And so that's just bodhicitta itself, but when we make a strong commitment that we are going to engender bodhicitta and that we are going to practice it, that is what we mean by the bodhisattva vow.
基本上已經係講咗乜嘢係願菩提心，乜嘢係行菩提心。但係如果我哋真係要去發一個誓言，我真係要去咁做嘅時候呢，而呢個咁嘅承諾呢，就變咗係呢個菩薩戒。
So it's possible to have bodhicitta before you take the bodhisattva vow.
咁其實最基本話，首先我哋要係發咗菩提心，然後先至去受呢個菩薩戒。
And it's actually very good. It's good to train in bodhicitta at any time. But at some point you might feel like you want to take the vow, like you want to make the commitment in the presence of Lama that you are going to achieve Buddhahood.
其實好多時呢，我哋有咁嘅諗法去發菩提心已經係非常之好。但係首先我哋如果真係想去接受呢啲咁嘅菩薩戒喺三寶面前，首先我哋就係要去具備呢個條件。
And so it's this taking the commitment that is what we call taking the bodhisattva vow. And then you have this vow that you are going to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings once you have taken it.
首先我哋去受菩薩戒就係對行菩薩道嘅一種承諾，而最終我哋要成就佛果就係為咗利益無量嘅眾生。
Now, there are different traditions on how to take the vows. There are the traditions that they take in many Chinese monasteries where they burn you with incense and all that sort of stuff.
咁其實受菩薩戒亦都有唔同嘅習俗，亦都有唔同嘅做法。咁例如我哋漢傳嘅佛教呢，就係話我哋會燃香而去接受呢個戒。
These are wonderful traditions. They're very good traditions because the burning yourself with incense or being burned with incense represents the amount of dedication and suffering and hardship that you need to be willing to undergo to achieve Buddhahood.
咁其實呢，呢個做法呢，亦都係非常之好，因為你係將你自己嘅色身而去令自己去受呢個苦，而去作為一個承諾去發展你嘅菩提心。
But those are in the Chinese tradition of practicing the Bodhisattva vow, not in the Tibetan tradition.
但係呢樣呢，只不過係我哋漢傳佛教有，係藏傳佛教係冇。
So in the Tibetan tradition, we primarily talk about two different ways that you can take the Bodhisattva vow.
咁其實喺藏傳佛教咧嘅傳統咧，就係有兩種方法可以接受呢個菩薩戒。
And these two different ways come from two different traditions that developed in India.
咁其實呢兩種受戒嘅方法咧，係來自印度。
The first of these traditions is the tradition that started with Nagarjuna and then continued with Aryadeva and other disciples and also included Shantideva.
第一個傳統咧就係嚟住呢個龍樹菩薩，咁一路傳到最後咧係呢個寂天菩薩。
And this tradition says that when you take the bodhisattva vow, you take the vow of engaged bodhicitta or aspirational and engaged bodhicitta together.
其實我哋受呢個傳統嘅菩薩戒咧，就係話我哋同時受呢個願菩提心同埋行菩提心嘅戒。
And so this is what we call in Tibetan the lineage of profound view.
呢個傳統咧就係嚟自西藏，叫做唔知中文係咪叫 profound view。
But basically, you can just think it's the tradition where you take the aspirational engaged bodhicitta together. That's the essence for this context.
最重要咧就係話我哋同時咧係接受呢個願菩提心同埋行菩提心嘅戒。
The other tradition started with Maitreya and Asanga, Vasubandhu, and members of what we call the Yogacarya tradition.
跟住嗰個菩薩戒咧就係嚟住呢個彌勒菩薩一路流傳到而家。
And in that tradition, you first take the vow of the aspirational bodhicitta, and then later you take the vow of engaged bodhicitta.
咁首先我哋係受咗呢個願菩提心戒，跟住先受呢個行菩提心。頭先漏咗講，其實第一個傳統叫甚深派，第二個傳統叫做廣大行派。
So both of these traditions are good ways to take the bodhisattva vow. When Trungpa Rinpoche gives the bodhisattva vow, he almost always gives the vow of the lineage of the profound view, where you take the two together.
通常咧有其他嘅方法可以接受呢個戒，但係一般嚟講咧，創古寧波車咧就係亦以呢個甚深派為基礎去傳呢個菩薩戒。
I think maybe because it's a little bit easier to give the vow.
咁可能呢個係比較容易去開呢個戒。
But the other tradition is one that's very important in our Kagyu tradition. It is the tradition that Gampopa taught. Last year or the year before, the Gyalwang Karmapa gave that version of the Yogacarya version of the Bodhisattva vows in Bodh Gaya.
其實舊年咧，大寶法王咧亦都係以呢個江波巴嘅傳承咧，開咗呢個廣大行派嘅菩薩戒。
So both traditions are good traditions. So the tradition is they're both generating bodhicitta and taking the vow, making the commitment to become a Buddha.
咁其實兩個傳統都係好嘅，咁最終亦都係一個承諾，就係話我哋要成就佛果。
And so then you might be wondering, well, who is it who can actually take the bodhisattva vow?
咁我哋會問邊個先至係真正係適合嘅平氣咧，去接受呢個菩薩戒咧？
Well, in order to take the bodhisattva vow, you should have one of the vows of the external vows of individual liberation, such as the vows we spoke about last week and the week before.
咁首先咧，我哋從外層方面開始咧，就係要接受呢個別解脫戒先。
In practice, it means that you should at least have taken the refuge vow to take the bodhisattva vow.
咁首先最基本，我哋係要受咗皈依戒先。
And then you might wonder, well, who can you take the vow from?
咁我哋又會問，我哋可以喺邊個身上可以傳呢個戒俾我呢？
Well, you take the vow from a guru, from a lama.
我哋係從呢個我哋嘅上司或者一個喇嘛身上可以得到呢啲戒。
So when we say lama, sometimes in many places people call any monks lamas. And so a lot of people call me Lama David Lama, whatever. Actually, I'm not really a lama. I'm a monk, but I'm not a lama.
首先我哋要明白，成日話我哋可以喺呢個喇嘛身上得到啲戒。首先我哋要搞清楚乜嘢係喇嘛先。其實喺西藏講嘅喇嘛係一個真正合資格嘅上師，就唔係我哋一般見到嘅僧人就叫做喇嘛。喇嘛係解真正嘅上師。
So it's best to take the bodhisattva vow from a real lama, not a fake lama like me. So you take the real, from Trungpa Rinpoche or Khenpo Thabu who's coming, or Lama Sunam or someone like, they're real lamas. So those are the people from whom it's appropriate to take it. And once you've taken it, then you can take it again on your own in front of a statue, imagining that all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are there.
咁我哋首先咧就要明白，我哋要係真正從一個合資格嘅喇嘛身上去得到呢啲戒。 上司非常謙虛嘅話，佢唔係一個合資格嘅，佢係一個假嘅。例如創嗰寧波車啊，有好多大嘅堪布啊，或者我哋中心嘅主持啊喇嘛蘇南，甚至乎我哋可以喺佛像面前係觀想有無量諸佛菩薩喺前面虛空，而去接受呢個戒。
And then you might wonder, how long, when you take the Bodhisattva vow, how long does the vow last?
咁我哋亦都要知道，究竟呢啲戒律會維持幾耐呢？
Like with the vows of individual liberation, they last either day and a night for the fasting vows, or they last for the rest of this life.
咁嗱，例如好似別解脫戒咁，八關齋戒我哋係受持一日一夜，咁喺五戒呢，我哋係受持終身。
But the Bodhisattva vow lasts until you achieve enlightenment.
但係菩薩戒就有好大嘅分別，就係話呢個菩薩戒係一路維持，直至到我哋成佛嗰一日為止。
So when you're taking the Bodhisattva vow, it's a really strong resolve. It's not a resolve. It's not just a temporary one for something we can think of. It's like from now on, forever, basically, until I achieve enlightenment, I am going to work solely for the benefit of sentient beings.
咁菩薩戒呢，其實係一個幾強嘅誓言，就係話從現在直至到我成就佛陀嘅果位呢段時間，我都係要去做利益眾生嘅事業。
So it is a very strong commitment. It's a long commitment. This gives it a lot of force and a lot of power to the commitment because you're taking this for something for longer than we can know with our conceptual minds.
咁其實呢個係一個非常之強同埋非常之時間長嘅一個承諾，咁亦都係具足有好大嘅能力，因為係從而家開始直至到我成佛，我都要受持呢啲菩薩戒。
At the same time, you might also find it a little bit scary. You might think about, well, in this lifetime, I can sort of guess that maybe in this lifetime it will work out, but in the future, who knows what's going to happen?
咁有時我哋一諗就會覺得會有啲驚啊，可能我今世可以做到，但係我下一世或者未來世做唔做得到呢？
But I don't think you need to worry about that. And the reason I don't think you need to worry about that is because by taking the Bodhisattva vow, then you're training yourself towards the virtue. You're planting seeds within your being that will ripen and continue to help you have bodhicitta in the future, to keep the resolve going from lifetime after lifetime.
大家其實係唔需要擔心，因為受咗呢個菩薩戒呢，跟住我哋會就依止呢啲戒律呢，慢慢去訓練自己。我哋就係將呢個菩提心嘅種子呢，就已經係種咗喺我哋嘅食田裏邊，係會生生世世都會帶落去，跟展現出嚟。
You might also think that it's too difficult to become a Buddha. It's too difficult to follow the Bodhisattva path. You read the life stories of the Buddha from all his previous lifetimes, which I'm sure they're in Chinese, they're in English. You can read these life stories, and when you read about the trials that the Buddha went through from lifetime after lifetime, it might seem rather imposing.
咁其實呢，我哋覺得係非常之難，我哋要去成佛係一樣非常之難嘅事，去行菩薩道亦都係一樣非常之難嘅事。但係我哋喺睇返過往釋迦牟尼佛嘅事蹟，佢亦都係發呢個菩提心而行呢個菩薩道，慢慢咁去延續落嚟。
But whether or not you take the Bodhisattva vow, you're going to be in this world or whichever world. You're going to take rebirth in a world anyways. And you're going to experience pain and suffering anyways. If you haven't taken the Bodhisattva vow, then any pain and suffering that you experience is just pointless. If you take the Bodhisattva vow and you undertake hardships for the sake of achieving Buddhahood, then everything that you do, all the hardships that you experience, have meaning. They have a purpose. There is a point for doing it. And so since you're going to experience pain and hardships anyways, you might as well undergo pain and hardships that have meaning.
簡單啲講就係話，我哋從呢一世跟住亦都係有未來嘅世，喺輪迴裏邊呢，我哋亦都會受好多痛苦。但係一個發咗菩提心嘅人，雖然佢再喺六道輪迴裏邊而係受呢啲苦，但係因為佢受持咗菩薩戒，發咗菩提心，變咗佢每一次翻嚟喺輪迴裏邊受嘅苦，亦都變咗係一樣有好大嘅意義。
And so when you take the Bodhisattva vow, it starts out saying, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until enlightenment's essence, which means until I achieve the Buddhahood.
咁首先我哋去受持呢個菩薩戒，喺呢個三寶面前就係話，我要受持呢個菩薩戒，直至到我成佛為止。
And then we say the meaning of the vow is that just as all of the Buddhas of the past have developed the resolve of bodhicitta, and just as they have practiced step by step all of the training of the bodhisattva, so too shall I develop the resolve of bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings. And so too shall I practice the trainings of the bodhisattva.
咁其實我哋要明白，過去、現在、未來十方三世諸佛咧，都係行持呢個菩薩道，發呢個菩提心而成佛。而所有嘅菩薩咧，佢哋都係受呢個菩薩戒而發菩提心，而行菩薩道。
And so you recite these words. When you take it in the presence of a lama, then you repeat the words after the lama. If you wish to recite the words on your own, that is wonderful. It's a very good thing to do. There are many different versions of the Bodhisattva vow. There are many different short texts. Like at the beginning of the Chenrezig Puja and many other pujas, it says in Tibetan, Sangye Chodan Sogi Chotnamla. You probably are familiar with this. Sangye Chodan Sogi Chotnamla Chanchu Badu Datni Japsumji. Half of you are reciting along with me. So those words, words of the Bodhisattva vow, a short version of it.
我哋受菩薩戒咧，就係話我哋要成日去念誦呢啲句語，或者話我哋受戒嘅時候係重複咁跟喇嘛念。咁其實喺藏傳佛教裏邊，亦都有好多種唔同嘅方法可以受持呢個菩薩戒。咁最基本咧就係話，我哋每一次修法，例如修四臂觀音嘅法之前，甚至乎好多法本，我哋都係要念呢個歸依法心文，就係呢個諸佛正法聖言僧，直至菩提我歸依，願我所修諸功德，為度眾生願成佛。就係頭先上師念嗰個作文版嘅中文。
Now, when you have taken the Bodhisattva vow, for the first time you go to a lama, and then afterwards you can take it again and again. That's a difference between the Bodhisattva vow and the vows of individual liberation. With the vows of individual liberation, you only take them once, generally, unless you break them and retake them. You take the vows of individual liberation once, and then you have them until you die. The Bodhisattva vow is different. You take the Bodhisattva vow as often as you can. The first time it's good to take it from a lama, and then it's good to do it on your own as often as you can.
受持呢個菩薩戒咧，就係話我哋可以重複又重複咁去受呢個菩薩戒。咁同呢個別解脫戒有分別，就係話別解脫戒咧，我哋只不過係受持一次，就係終身嘅。咁除非我哋破咗戒，就要重受。咁菩薩戒咧就係話我哋可以重複咁去再去受呢個菩薩戒，甚至乎我哋可以自己一個人念誦頭先嗰段歸依法心文，亦都係可以嘅，同埋做得越多越好。
So once you've taken the Bodhisattva vow, what have you actually committed yourself to doing?
究竟我哋接受咗菩薩戒之後，我哋要承諾去做啲乜嘢呢？
Well, the basic commitment is, of course, to achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. But we can sort of break that down to make it easier to understand into the things that you should not do and the things that you should do.
咁最基本咧就係話，我希望自己成佛，亦都希望我成佛之後可以度無量個眾生成佛。咁基本上就係我哋有乜嘢應該做，同埋有乜嘢唔應該做。
Now, with the things that you should not do, basically your commitment is to help all sentient beings. And so the most fundamental thing that you must not do is ever give up on any sentient beings. So it's never to give up or reject sentient beings and think, forget that person, I'm never going to help them. Maybe sometime there's someone whom you can't help at that particular time. But even if you can't help someone at a particular time, you can make the aspiration, in the future, may I be able to help this person.
咁首先唔應該做嘅嘢咧，就係話我哋唔應該放棄、離棄任何嘅眾生。喺好多個環境裏邊，我哋喺嗰一刻係冇辦法去幫到呢個眾生，但係我仍然希望去發願，我喺未來世或者喺日後，我有機會機緣成熟嘅時候，我去利益佢。
But sometimes, that's a very broad one. It's very easy to keep that idea in mind. But sometimes people like to have more precepts to sort of follow.
呢樣嘢咧，我哋要擺自己嘅心咧係唔係好難，但係其實亦都有好多其他唔同嘅戒，我哋係要做嘅。
And so in the Tibetan tradition, we generally say that there are 18 different precepts that you can follow. There are 14 precepts for those of the best ability who can keep them all in mind. There are 4 precepts for people of average ability, and there is 1 precept for the people of the least ability.
喺藏傳佛教咧，菩薩戒係有18條，咁有14條咧係最有根器嘅人去受，4條戒咧就係俾一般根器嘅人去受，咁1條戒咧就係俾最冇根器嘅人去受。
So the 14 precepts, you can count them as 14 or 18, and I'll explain that in a moment. But with the 14 different precepts, the first of these precepts, you should never seize the wealth of the 3 jewels, which means either stealing it or if you are in a government, don't take it or seize it in any way.
第一條戒咧就係話我哋唔可以竊奪三寶嘅財物。
And the second is that you should not reject the Dharma.
第二咧就係話我哋唔可以不受正法。
Nor should you ever take the robes of a monk or a nun, so take their robes away from them and make them wear lay clothes.
咁亦都我哋唔可以令一個出家人去還俗去做翻一個在家。
And the fourth of them is that you should not commit any of the 5 heinous acts.
跟住嗰條咧就係話唔可以做呢個5無間罪，即係殺父、殺母、出佛身血、殺阿羅漢同埋破和合眾。
And I think Carlson may have just translated these for us. Yeah, so not killing your mother, not killing your father, not killing an arhat, not drawing blood from the Buddha with a malicious intent, and not causing a schism in the Sangha. So if you've done any of those, if you do any of those, then you cannot take the bodhisattva, or then you have broken your bodhisattva vow.
咁如果我哋係做咗呢5無間罪咧，就已經係破咗呢個菩薩戒。
If you have done one of those, you can still develop bodhicitta. If you have done one of the 5 heinous acts, then you can still develop bodhicitta. It's just if you have bodhicitta and then you do them, that's bad.
咁如果你做咗之後，你係未受戒咧，你仲可以去受呢個菩薩戒。但係如果你受咗菩薩戒之後去做咧，就係一樣非常之嚴重嘅惡行。
And the 5th of these is holding wrong views.
跟住嗰條戒咧就係執邪惡見。
Now, holding wrong views means that thinking that karma, cause, and effect are not true, thinking there's no rebirth, thinking that it doesn't matter if you do good things or bad things. That is, in the specific wrong view, that is a downfall of the bodhisattva vow.
執邪惡見係乜嘢咧？就係話，首先係唔相信因果，唔相信有輪迴。無論我哋做嘅善業或者惡業咧，都係冇報應嘅，即係人死如燈滅，乜嘢都係斷見嘅。呢個就叫做執邪惡見。咁如果我哋做呢樣嘢咧，我哋已經係犯咗呢條戒。
Now, these 5 downfalls are said to be the downfalls of a king like Bodhisattva. And the reason they're taught is because often the Bodhisattva is reborn as a king. And as a king, there are special things that you should not do. You shouldn't kill your father to take the throne. You shouldn't have the wrong views or seize the wealth of the 3 jewels and things like that. So that it's said in the sutras, these are specifically the precepts for kings.
即係我哋去犯戒咧，其實亦都裏邊有講過，即係皇帝要受嗰條戒，亦都係一樣，佢都唔可以竊奪三寶嘅財物，同埋唔可以殺父啊、殺母啊等等。
But I think there are also things that, of course, we ordinary people should avoid doing.
咁其他嘅一般嘅眾生咧，基本上係可以做到。
Sometimes the bodhisattva is born not as a king, but as a minister. And so if you're born as a minister, then you shouldn't do those 5. And in addition, you should also not conquer any villages, towns, regions, or countries.
即係如果菩薩降生為皇帝，就係頭先佢應該要受嘅戒啦。如果係一個菩薩降生成為一個宰相咧，咁佢亦都係唔可以咧去毀滅呢啲城邑，即係去攻打或者去毀滅城市人哋嘅居處。例如去屠城啊、殺人放火啊，都係唔得。
So those 6 downfalls are primarily for bodhisattvas born as kings or ministers or government officials.
咁呢6種犯戒嘅對境咧，基本上都係皇帝啦、宰相啦，同埋政府嘅重要嘅官員要去守持嘅。
And then there are 8 precepts that are for everyone else, for bodhisattvas who are beginners.
咁另外嗰8條戒咧，基本上係俾一開始行菩薩道嘅眾生去受。
And with all of these downfalls for bodhisattvas who are beginners, the main point of all of them is that you want to do things that are going to help people and help encourage people to practice the Mahayana Dharma and to achieve Buddhahood.
咁跟住嗰8條戒咧，即係都係話我哋要成日都要去幫助利益眾生，希望佢哋亦都可以受持佛法。
And so the first of these is that you should not teach the untrained emptiness.
首先第一條戒咧就係話向非根器嘅眾生說甚深嘅法，就係例如係講空性。如果對境係唔信空性，我哋唔可以對佢講空性。
And the reason for this is if you meet someone on the street who says, oh, I'm interested in Buddhism, and then you tell them, well, actually, there's no form, no smell, no taste, no touch, no eye, no ear, no nose, and they say, wait a minute, I've got eyes, I've got ears, this Buddhism is strange, I'm not going to, and then they get discouraged or they might get scared about it. So when you teach people about emptiness, you should teach people who are ready to hear about it, who aren't going to be freaked out by hearing about it.
其實最主要嘅原因呢，就係話，例如我哋喺街撞到一個朋友，呢個朋友突然間對佛法係生起信心，咁佢亦都係想去學佛，咁但係你同佢講，喂，其實我哋學佛係乜嘢都係空嘅，係無眼耳鼻舌身意，咁對方一聽到喺佢嗰個階段，佢話有冇搞錯？我明明係有眼有耳有鼻有舌有身，咁但係你點解會咁講呢？而你咁講呢，係會對佢呢產生一種疑惑，而令到佢去放棄去修持佛法。當我哋去講空性嘅時候，講五蘊皆空嘅時候，我哋係應該去對啲適合根器嘅人講，唔應該對啲唔適合根器嘅人講。
The next of these is to turn someone back from full enlightenment. If someone has the resolve of bodhicitta and they want to become a Buddha, then you say, no, you shouldn't become a Buddha. You should just try to become an arhat instead. That's also a root downfall.
咁另外一個犯戒嘅對境就係話，有人想發想係最終要去成佛，你係同佢講，叫佢唔好成佛啦，佢做一個羅漢算啦，即係呢條戒就叫做勸退大乘。
The next one is disparaging or talking badly about the Shravakas and the Prateka Buddhas. In other words, the people who practice the Dharma of the foundation vehicle.
咁跟住嗰條戒咧就叫做誹謗小乘，個對境就係咩咧？就係話我哋去識對四沙門果啊、須陀洹、斯陀含、阿羅漢、或者呢啲辟支佛、緣覺或者獨覺，對佢哋講，即係睇小佢哋，呢個叫誹謗小乘。
The next is telling lies about the profound, which means saying, oh, I've realized emptiness, or something like that. So telling lies about having realized the profound nature.
咁跟住嗰條戒咧就叫做妄說上人法，就係話基本上自己就唔識嘅，咁咧就喺度扮晒自己識，隨意咁咧去妄言咧講上師嘅法語。
The sixth is seizing offerings. So when offerings have been made, if you then take them for yourself.
跟住嗰條戒咧就係收三寶嘅財物，就係話本來係供養僧寶或者係經理供養僧寶，而你將呢啲財物係收受。
The seventh is making unjust rules, rules that discriminate against someone else.
咁跟住嗰條戒咧就叫做制立惡律，就係話隨自己嘅喜好咧去制定一啲非佛法嘅邪惡律例。
And the last is giving up aspirational bodhicitta.
跟住嗰條戒咧就係放棄呢個願菩提心，即係捨菩提心呢條戒。
So those are the 14 root downfalls for the people who are able to do a lot of different precepts.
咁呢14條戒咧，基本就係14條根本嘅墮戒，會令我哋下墮嘅戒律。
But for a lot of people, that's too much to keep track of, too much to worry about. And actually, if you practice the 4 for people of middling capacity, you actually automatically end up keeping yourself from doing the 14 for those of highest capacity. So if you do the 4, there are the 4, for people of middling capacity, we say there are 4 precepts that you can hold. Actually, this is not worse than holding the 14 precepts, because if you hold the 4, then you automatically will also hold all the rest.
基本上咧，有啲人覺得話係太多戒，我要去守。咁對一個基本上係中性根器人嚟講咧，佢係會受持4條戒。咁但係其實去受持呢條4條戒咧，係唔會差過去受持呢14條戒，因為最終佢係會帶領到你去受持其他嘅戒。
And so the 4 are, the first of these is to praise yourself and disparage others for gain. So what this means is you want something. So you speak well of yourself and you criticize other people so that you get something good.
呢條第一條戒咧就叫做自讚毀他，咁就係話為咗達到你自己嘅目的而去抬高自己、貶低他人，呢條就係叫做自讚毀他戒。
The reason why this is such a terrible thing for a bodhisattva to do is because as bodhisattvas, what are we trying to do? We are trying to help others. We're trying to not cherish ourselves, but to cherish others more than ourselves. And so if we talk ourselves up in order to get something, then we're actually doing the exact opposite of what we really should try to do.
咁其實呢條戒咧，第一係好易犯，亦都係一條非常之得人驚嘅戒。點解咧？其實你受咗呢條戒就係你已經係一個菩薩，咁菩薩你應該做啲咩咧？ 菩薩係應該係話不為自身求安樂，但願眾生得離苦。但係如果你係為咗達到自己嘅目的而去做一啲自讚毀他嘅嘢呢，你就係同呢條戒對立。
And so that's the first, is to praise yourself and disparage others for gain. The second is to withhold the dharma or wealth out of stinginess.
第二條戒呢，就係叫做不施發財，即係話無論對三寶啊或者對需要個眾生，你係唔肯布施俾佢哋。
And so what this means is someone asks you for a dharma teaching and you could teach them to it, but you feel jealous or stingy and you don't give it to them.
舉個例子，其實唔一定係同錢有關嘅，咁就係話你有咁嘅能力去說法，有人請你去說法，但係你唔想去說，唔肯利益同你有緣嘅眾生，已經係犯咗了解。
Or someone might ask you for something, you have it, you could give it to them, but you feel stingy and you don't give it to them.
咁例如你有一樣嘢，你係有能力去送俾人哋嘅，就係因為你自己嘅慳貪，你唔肯送俾佢，咁呢亦都係犯咗呢條戒。
And the reason this is, it's because this is motivated out of stinginess. This is motivated by an affliction, a negative state of mind. And it's causing, and we're thinking, I want to keep this for myself, as opposed to sharing something that will benefit others with them.
犯呢條戒嘅動機就係嚟自一個唔好嘅負面嘅心理影響，就係你嘅慳貪，就係話我明明係有咁嘅嘢，我亦都有能力去同眾生分享，但係我因為自己慳貪，我唔肯攞出嚟同眾生分享。
The third is to hold a grudge even against people who have apologized.
第三條戒呢，就係話不受懺悔嘅人而去責打他人，就係話即係人哋做錯嘢，你係唔接受佢嘅懺悔，反為去責罵，甚至乎毆打他人。
And so, this is like if someone, of course, we're living in an impure world, people have conflict and they do things, and someone will do something to offend you at some point. Now, if they realize that they've done something and apologize to you, but you still hold a grudge thinking, I'm going to do what I can to get that person later, then that is one of the root downfalls.
咁正如我頭先所講啦，特別喺我哋而家現代呢個社會，大家都會有好多衝突。咁就係話人哋做錯咗嘢，但係人哋亦都承認佢做錯咗嘢，而向你道歉或者懺悔。你唔單止唔肯接受佢嘅懺悔，唔肯原諒佢，反而仲要諗下日後我點對付你。
Or if you think to yourself, that person did something to me, so I'm not going to help them. I'll help other people, but not that person. Holding a grudge against that person is the downfall.
即係話呢個人得罪咗我，我而家對佢好唔高興，我以後都唔會幫呢個人，我寧願幫其他嘅人啦。咁亦都係叫做犯。
And the fourth is rejecting the Mahayana Dharma and teaching the false Dharma.
咁第四條戒咧就係話誹謗大乘，說似是法，係毀謗大乘嘅佛法，係講啲類似嘅世間法，就係呢條戒。
So rejecting the Mahayana Dharma means, that saying, Mahayana Dharma is no good. I'm not going to practice that anymore. It's no good.
咁就係話大乘嘅佛法係唔好嘅，我以後都唔會再去修持大乘嘅佛法。
So those are the four for people of intermediate capacity, the four precepts.
基本上以上嗰四條戒咧，就係對一般中正根器嘅人去受嘅四條戒。
But then there's the one precept for the people of the least capacity.
咁跟住咧就有一條戒咧，就係話對最低根器嘅人要去受嗰條戒。
Actually, in another text, it has it the other way around. It has the one precept for people of highest capacity. So sometimes there are disputes about this. At any rate, there is this one precept which is to never give up on sentient beings.
其實呢條戒亦都有好多爭議，係關於對唔同根器嘅人。咁但係呢條戒基本上就係叫做永遠不捨眾生。
So never giving up on sentient beings means that no matter what sentient being there is, that sentient being needs to be happy. And that we need to do what we can to bring them happiness. And so no matter what they've done, what they're like, who they are, or anything, we need to do whatever we can to help that sentient being come to lasting happiness.
即係呢條戒就係話個對境就係話，我哋首先要明白所有嘅眾生都係想離苦得樂，咁我哋係唔可以離棄任何一個眾生，因為佢亦都係想離苦得樂，所以我哋係唔可以離棄佢。
Now sometimes the example I always think of here in Hong Kong, because you see it a lot, are the fish in the tanks at the restaurants. You'd like to do something I'd like to do something to help them, but I can't. I mean, there's only limited. We do a lot of fish releases and life releases in the center, and that's wonderful. But there's still more and more fish and more crabs and lobsters that are being caught and imprisoned and then boiled alive and then eaten. And I'd love to be able to do life releases to help all of these fish and all of these beings, but we can't.
首先我哋要明白，例如我哋喺香港咁，我哋成日去好多酒樓，咁喺呢啲咁嘅魚缸裏邊咧，就養咗好多不同嘅海鮮。但係其實我哋個心係好想去能夠利益佢哋，去放佢哋，去救佢哋。咁但係我哋亦都冇咁嘅能力去放晒所有呢啲咁嘅眾生。即使我哋個心係幾想去做，例如有幾多魚啊、蟹啊、龍蝦就係咁。
So the question is, if we don't go in there and give the restaurant owner a pile of money to buy the fish and then release them, have we committed a downfall?
就算我哋係冇咁嘅能力，係有咁多錢去買晒呢啲咁嘅海鮮而去放，咁代唔代表我哋係犯咗呢條戒咧？
And you haven't, actually. The reason you haven't done it, there's sometimes you just can't help someone. Sometimes it's just not possible to do it. No matter how much you'd like to do it, sometimes there's no way you can help another sentient being or a particular sentient being in a particular situation. But that doesn't mean that you've given up on that being. You can see those beings who need help and have the wish, I pray that in the future I have the ability to help these beings.
咁首先，當我哋係遇到呢種對境嘅時候，基本上我哋係有啲嘢我哋係不可能去做，亦都冇辦法去做，但亦都冇咁多錢去做。咁唔代表我哋係犯咗呢條戒，但係我哋個心要去咁諗，就係話我今日救唔到你，你可能會被殺，但係我希望日後當我有能力嘅時候，我能夠救到你。
And so if you walk by the fish tanks and you say, they deserve it, they no way to help them, let's have some chowder tonight, that's bad. But if you walk by the fish tanks and there's nothing you can do in this moment to help them, and you make the aspiration, in the future may I be able to help these beings, that is actually, not only is that, not breaking it, it's also a great source of virtue because you're making a wonderful aspiration.
當我哋可能會去行到入呢啲咁嘅酒樓，見到呢啲咁嘅海鮮，首先我哋唔好諗話，我冇辦法救你，你都係抵死㗎啦。不如我哋今晚整煲周打湯嘆下先。但係雖然我哋係唔可以去救到呢啲咁嘅眾生，但係我哋仍然可以發一個善願，就係話喺未來當我有能力嘅時候呢，我可能夠救你。咁嗱，呢個唔單止話你冇做而犯戒，反為你係仲有功德，因為你係生咗一個清淨嘅願去救到呢啲眾生。
Now you might wonder, why is this such a good thing? Why would that be such a good thing to do, to just make an aspiration and then keep walking by? Actually, it's a wonderful thing to do because becoming a Buddha starts with making the aspiration, right? So making the aspiration is good. When you make an aspiration, then it is a seed that will grow and produce a result. You don't have to doubt about that. It will bring good results in the future. You can pray as you walk by, in the future may I be able to help these beings, and in the future it will come true.
大家要明白，願力呢係不可思議嘅。基本上我哋從事相上而家係冇辦法去救佢，但係當我哋能夠發到一個善願，就係等於將呢啲咁嘅善嘅種子呢，就種咗喺我哋嘅識田度。咁以後每一生每一世呢，我哋都會將呢個善嘅種子去延續，去利益同我哋有緣嘅眾生。
And so if you can't really keep the 4 or you can't keep the 18, if you just keep this one, you will be keeping your bodhisattva vow.
咁就算我哋唔能夠受持頭先最初講嗰14條戒，跟住講嗰4條戒，如果我哋能夠係好嚴謹咁去守住呢條戒，我哋仍然都係得到菩薩戒。
So those are the things that you should not do. Basically, to make it simple and easy, never give up on sentient beings. That's what you should not do.
咁首先我哋要明白乜嘢係唔應該做。嗱，其實呢條戒係好重要，就係話我哋喺未來唔係淨係講今世，喺未來嘅生生世世，我哋都唔可以離棄任何一個眾生。
But then there are also the things that you should do.
跟住落嚟就要講有咩我哋係應該做呢？
And what you should do is the practice of the 6 paramitas.
咁我哋應該要做嘅就係話要去行持呢個六度波羅蜜。
Practice of the 6 paramitas is more than I can talk about in 15 minutes.
咁其實要去行持呢個六度波羅蜜呢，係要需要多過15分鐘去講。
But one thing I would like to say about them is that when you do the practices of generosity or discipline or patience and so forth, one thing that is very powerful to do is at the same time as you are generous, for example, then you should make aspirations and dedicate the merit of it.
咁喺六度波羅蜜，布施、持戒、忍辱、精進、禪定、般若。舉個例子就係話，布施就係話，我哋布施同埋要，如果布施咗之後，係要將個功德馬上回向俾眾生。
And we can see why from a story of a previous incarnation of the Buddha. We can understand why.
咁我哋就會明白點解佛陀要降生喺我哋呢個世界。
So a long time ago, this is at the second time that there was one life before where the Buddha developed the resolve of bodhicitta, and then in the next lifetime, he actually started to gather the accumulation of merit. And so in this lifetime where he gathered the accumulation of merit, he was born as a very, very poor Brahmin farmer.
咁喺好耐嘅時候咧，喺佛陀在之前，未成佛在之前嗰一世咧，就係話佛陀點樣去累積咁多功德咧？就係話喺嗰一世咧，佢係成為一個婆羅門家族嘅農夫。
So he was very poor. He had hardly enough food to feed himself and his family. He had a very hard life.
咁喺呢一世咧，釋迦佛咧亦非常之窮，甚至乎係唔夠衣食俾佢嘅屋企人。
And in this, but at this time, there was a Buddha who was present in the world. That Buddha's name was Shakyamuni.
喺嗰一世咧，亦都同時有佛出世，呢尊佛亦都係叫做釋迦牟尼。
And the Buddha Shakyamuni was one day going on his alms round, and this poor Brahmin farmer was thinking to himself, I am such a poor farmer. All I have to eat myself is like really thin gruel, like really thin kanji. And there's no way that the Buddha would ever come and accept an offering from someone as wretched as I am.
咁喺嗰一世，呢尊佛亦都係叫做釋迦牟尼。咁有一日咧，呢個農夫即係釋迦佛嘅前身，咁就係話佢好希望去供養到呢尊佛。佢自己個心喺度諗：哇！我咁窮，我亦都冇好嘢去供養佢，連我自己食嘅嘢都係啲好稀嘅粥。佛陀根本就唔會接受我呢種供養。
And so the Buddha Shakyamuni knew that this poor Brahmin farmer thought this, and so he came specifically to his place. And the poor farmer was so overjoyed to see the Buddha coming.
咁咧，佛陀有神通，佢亦都知道係呢個農夫係想供養佢，咁佢就特登咧就去到呢個農夫屋企，咁就去接受佢嘅供養。而呢個農夫亦都非常之開心。
And the farmer then offered the Buddha this all he had, which was this thin gruel. He offered it to him, and at the same time as he offered it, he made an aspiration.
當呢個農夫供養呢尊釋迦佛嘅時候咧，咁佢就攞出呢啲好稀嘅粥去供養佢，但係佢就發咗個願。
And his aspiration was, in the future, may I become a Buddha who is just like this Buddha Shakyamuni. May I have the same lifespan. May I be the same size. May I live in a similar world realm. And may I have the same name as he does.
佢發咗呢個傳願咧，就話佢希望佢未來世能夠再受生喺呢個世界，係做一尊佛。成一尊佛同呢尊釋迦佛一模一樣，甚至乎係同佢嘅身形啊，佢住呢個世界啊，同埋佢嘅所有都係同呢尊佛類似。
And so it's because of this, that was the first merit that he gathered on his path to enlightenment. It is because of this that he was able to become a Buddha. Now, if he had just made his offering of thin gruel to the Buddha, it would have been a tremendous source of merit. But it would not have had the same effect as it did because he joined it with an aspiration.
其實佢做呢個功德咧，亦都係為佢未來咧成佛咧，係作為一個好好嘅條件。其實基本上我哋能夠將我哋所有嘅嘢，甚至乎係一碗咁稀嘅粥去供養一尊佛咧，個功德已經係好大。但係亦都唔似我哋要去發一個善願，係將來要成佛而去利益眾生咁大。
And so it doesn't really matter how big your offering is, or you might be giving just $1 Hong Kong or even 10 cents. It doesn't matter. What is important is your motivation and the aspiration you make with your offering.
其實我哋係唔好成日去衡量我再可以作出嘅供養係有幾大或者有幾好，呢個係唔重要。甚至乎就算我哋係捐1蚊或者捐1毫子，如果我哋係來自一個好嘅動機同埋發一個善願，呢個功德亦都係無量。
So those are what you need to practice the 6 paramitas. You need to never give up on sentient beings. You need to always try to keep bodhicitta in mind. And so the question is, how do you keep bodhicitta in mind all the time?
基本上我哋要去受持呢個菩薩戒，行呢個菩薩道，最基本就係話我哋成日都要去行持呢個六度波羅蜜，同埋永遠都唔可以去放棄任何一個眾生。
Well, part of it is by training yourself. You can do things like the practice of the 7 points of mind training, or you can do Chenrezig practice and Mani mantras, and you can always think about bodhicitta.
我哋係可以從自己日常嘅訓練開始，嗱，例如我哋要去培養呢個七覺智啦，七種覺智嘅心啦，甚至乎係修四臂觀音嘅法門啦，或者係念呢個六字大明咒啦。其實我哋每做一件咁嘅事咧，都係以菩提心為基礎。
But really, basically what you need to do is you need to be mindful and aware. You need to remember to have bodhicitta, and then you need to think about yourself, oh, am I acting out of bodhicitta or not?
我哋要達得到我哋嘅目的就係我哋成日都要保持一種覺性，成日都要記住究竟我行菩薩道要做啲乜嘢嘢咧，成日都將佢擺喺個心度。
But there's one piece of advice that Rinpoche always gives, and it actually works quite well. And this comes from the 7 points of mind training. The basic instruction is, in the morning when you get up, you should think to yourself, today may I act out of bodhicitta, may I always remember bodhicitta, may I never do anything to harm anyone, and may I always act well. And you make a strong resolve, I'm going to do this. And then in the evening, before you go to bed, you think to yourself, well, okay, in the morning I got up, I made the resolve to have bodhicitta and to practice bodhicitta all day. How did I do? And sometimes you've done well, and it's good. And sometimes maybe you forgot a little bit.
創果仁波切咧，亦都成日就係俾一個好好嘅提議我哋，就係話去修持呢個七覺智。咁修持呢個七覺智咧，就係話當我哋喺早上一起身嘅時候，第一件事我哋就諗今日我應該點去用菩提心去利益人哋呢？同埋我有冇成日都諗住菩提心呢？我哋一定要去發展一個好強嘅信心同埋信念，係話我哋要去咁做。咁嗱，去到夜晚嘅時候，我哋瞓覺之前，我哋亦都要問下自己，我究竟做成點呢？今日有時你會覺得我做得幾好，但係有時你又會覺得我係唔記得咗去做。
Now, if in the evening when you look back on the day and you feel like, oh yes, I remembered to practice bodhicitta, to think about it, to develop the resolve of bodhicitta, that's very good. Then you make the resolve, I'm going to do even better at it tomorrow and have even more bodhicitta tomorrow.
當我哋喺臨瞓前，好多時話係我記得我有發過菩提心，有諗過菩提心，亦都有去做過，但係跟住又點呢？就話希望我會做得更好。
And some days, though, you might just completely forget about bodhicitta all day long. You just totally forget. And you might even start getting angry at people, getting into fights at work or with your family or whatever. And then when you go to bed at night, then you realize, oh, today I didn't do well at all.
有啲時候我哋係完全咧係將呢個菩提心咧係完全忘記，我哋會發嬲啦，甚至乎會為咗工作同人拗撬啦，或者同屋企嘅人拗撬啦。
And so if that happens, then you think, today was bad, I am not going to be like that again. Tomorrow I am going to have bodhicitta. I'm going to act well. I'm not going to get angry at anyone. I'm going to be good tomorrow.
咁喺呢個時候你就應該話今日我做得好差我完全忘失咗菩提心，我又發咗脾氣。咁但係話我希望我以後唔好再去咁做，同埋日後會做得更好。
Now when you start out, you'll have probably more days when you forget. But if you do it long enough, then eventually you might start having a few days where you remember bodhicitta. And then if you keep doing it, you will, every day you'll feel to yourself, oh, I did really well with bodhicitta today.
初受呢啲戒嘅時候咧，就會有好多日子咧，你都係會忘失咗呢個菩提心。咁但係亦都會有好幾日你係會明白嘅，就係話點都好，我都係要去將佢呢個菩提心延續落去。
Now, with the Bodhisattva vow, you might wonder, well, we've gone through how you take the vow and what the precepts of the vow are. And sometimes what happens, you take the vow, you intend to keep it, and you find that you've done something that goes against it. You find that, oops, you did actually give up on someone for a little while today or something like that. And if that happens, what should you do?
今日我哋亦都講過咧，呢個菩薩戒點去受呢啲戒，呢啲戒究竟係乜嘢嘢？但係當我哋做咗啲嘢係同我哋嘅菩薩戒相互違背嘅時候，咁我要點呢？咁我係咪要去放棄佢呢？ 我應該去叫佢點做呢？
Well, basically, first of all, you don't need to worry about it too much. And the reason you don't need to worry about it too much is that there are different kinds of vows.
首先我哋係唔應該太擔心，因為係有好多不同嘅戒。
There are vows that we take to keep, and there are vows that we take to train ourselves.
咁有啲戒呢，我哋係要去守持，實際係要去做嘅。咁有啲戒呢，我哋淨係要提醒自己。
With like the 5 precepts, for example, when you take the 5 precepts, you take them with the intention that you're going to keep the 5 precepts.
例如去受持5戒，我哋去受持5戒之前就係話，我一定係有咁嘅動機要去守呢啲戒。
And because the 5 precepts are vows of your body and speech, they're relatively easy to keep.
咁其實呢5戒最主要係針對我哋嘅身同埋我哋嘅意，同埋我哋嘅語，亦都係比較容易去守嘅。
But the Bodhisattva vow is different. It's not a vow so much of body and speech, but of our minds.
但係菩薩戒唔同，菩薩戒係心嘅戒，所有大乘嘅戒都係心戒，即係我哋起心動念都係會影響到我哋嘅善惡行。
And because it's a vow of our mind, we don't have as much control over our minds. You may say, I'm not going to give up on any sentient beings, and then find yourself, giving up on someone tomorrow.
咁其實呢樣嘢係比較困難去做，因為好多時候我哋都唔能夠控制到我哋嘅自心。例如我哋話唔好去放棄任何一個眾生，但係其實你已經係放棄咗眾生。
And so it's important to remember that the function of the Bodhisattva vow is to train ourselves, not to create rules that we have to follow.
其實個作用就係話我哋要去製造一啲戒律，即係一啲規律，要我哋去遵守。
So the vows of individual liberation are like a beautiful porcelain cup. Falls on the ground, it breaks, it's broken.
咁嗱，例如5戒咁，5戒就係等於一個花樽。咁如果我哋跌咗佢落地，佢碎咗咧，咁我哋就完㗎啦，即係呢就破咗呢啲戒㗎。
But the Bodhisattva vows are like a gold vase. The gold vase falls on the ground, it gets dented, and then you can hammer it back into shape.
菩薩戒就係唔同，菩薩戒就等於個足金做嘅花樽，就算我哋跌咗佢落地下，佢凹咗，我哋仍然都可以揼翻佢，變翻圓形。
When you find that you have done something, that you've given up on someone, or that someone asked you for money and you didn't give it to them out of stinginess, when that happens and you realize that, then you can make a confession and take the Bodhisattva vow again, and you're fine.
咁有啲時候我哋就話唔好去放棄任何眾生，例如有啲人佢需要錢，可能你唔俾佢係出自你自己嘅慳貪。咁喺呢個時候呢，我哋點做呢？我哋就係需要去懺悔，同埋再重受呢個菩薩戒。
And so the confession is like I discussed a couple of weeks ago. It's like reciting Sutra in 3 sections for confession of downfalls.
懺悔其實亦都有好多方法，正如佢上個禮拜亦有講過，有好多法門係可以作為一個懺悔。
And so I won't go into it so much tonight. We're also running out of time. So at any rate, the important thing to remember about the Bodhisattva vow is because it's a vow that we take for training, you can take the vow frequently, and it's good to take the vow as often as you can.
今晚就唔係好夠時間，咁但係當我哋係受呢個菩薩戒呢，其實係對我哋嚟講係一種訓練，同埋我哋係要可以不停重複咁去受呢個菩薩戒，係越受得多係越好。
It's important to remember that, Buddhism, it's a slow process. It takes a long time to change ourselves. Really what we have to do is sort of transform the way we think about things. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like we're going to take the Bodhisattva vow and then be perfect people tomorrow. You take the Bodhisattva vow and it takes a while. You have to train yourself over time. So it just takes a step and a step and a step and a step, and eventually things will change and you will generally have true result from your training.
一個重點就係話，佛法其實係需要一段好長嘅時間先至會最終成就我哋嘅果位，亦都唔係話我哋今日受咗菩薩戒就會突然間聽日就會有啲嘢發生，咁變成一個大好人，係唔係咁嘅？其實好多時候就係話，我哋要一步一步按部就班咁去訓練自己。 而最終呢，我哋亦都係會得到一個正面嘅利益同埋一個正面嘅結果。
So I think enough on the Bodhisattva vows this evening, and I'll take a few questions. But before I do, last week when I spoke about the 5 precepts, there were some people who later spoke to Carlson who said they would like to take the 5 precepts. And people asked if I would give the 5 precepts. I asked Rinpoche if I could, and he said I can. So if there are people who would like to take the 5 precepts next Monday, I want to get an idea of how many people might be interested. If there are a few people, we can meet beforehand and do it in a small ceremony. If there are a lot of people, we can do it here all together. If you would like to take the 5 precepts next Monday, could you just let me know by raising your hand?
咁跟住落嚟，大家係可以問問題。但係上個禮拜咧，亦都有啲師兄同我講，佢話可唔可以受持5戒？咁上司亦都係問過松古寧波車，佢話佢可以傳5戒俾你哋。咁如果大家想受5戒嗰啲咧，可以喺下個禮拜1去受。咁如果係少部分嘅人咧，佢就會獨立咁同你哋受戒。如果係有好多人咧，佢就會喺講經完咗之後一齊受。
So is there anyone who's interested?
有冇人想受持5戒？
Yeah? No? Okay.
啊
I can't tell. Yes? No?
冇人想。
Or not
上個禮
decided
拜
yet?
咪邊個有問過就舉手啦。邊個想受？
Okay, we've got a couple people. Please come at 7:30 next Monday, and we will do it before the teaching on the mantra vows.
係咪有3個人想受？
And if there are more people, fine.
舉
If you
高啲
decide
手
later.
嘛。
Okay. If you aren't raising your hand now and want to come, just come at 7:30 next week.
好
Okay?
啦，OK。如果邊個想受戒嘅，就7點半鐘，下個禮拜1嚟到中心。
And then we'll do that ceremony first for anyone who's interested.
咁上司就會傳戒俾你哋。
Now, are there any questions?
有冇人有問題？
上司上次係講過關於係有啲戒律咧係關於8關齋戒，咁上次就係上司都有講過，就係話有一部分有一啲人咧係唔可以受呢個戒律嘅。但係我一個問題就係話喺而家呢個時候呢個社會咧有一啲係關於同性戀嘅人士咧，咁我哋喺佛法裏邊去點去睇同性戀嗰個人士，因為而家社會裏邊都好普遍去講呢一個問題，同埋呢啲人士係對於佢哋受持戒律或者係學習佛法佢哋係有冇問題呢？
The question is, we talk about the 8 fasting vows and also the pratimoksha vows, the lay precepts. In this modern world, there tend to be a lot of homosexuality, sodomy, lesbians. And for these people, can they still take the vows and whatever they do, engage in their daily lives? Does that has any conflict to the 8 fasting vows and the 5 precepts?
Well, with the 8 fasting vows, they're vows for celibacy. So any sexual activity whatsoever is out. So it doesn't matter homosexual, heterosexual, whatever. Nope, none. The 8 fasting vows, because they're only for one day. With the lay precepts, some explanations of the lay precepts would make homosexual activity a violation of the no sexual misconduct. Other people say it is not a violation. One way, if you are uncertain, is you can take the other 4. and then you can keep it and you can be certain that you're not doing. So if if you're thinking about taking the 5 precepts, and with any of them, if you think maybe I can't keep that one, then you don't have to take it. If you think maybe not drinking as hard in social situations, I can't take that, you don't have to take that. And when you take the 5 precepts, you take however many of them you feel like you can actually keep.
嗱，咁首先咧就係喺8關齋戒咧，就絕對係唔可以有任何嘅性行為，咁包括同性戀或者雙性戀都係唔得嘅，即係就算係正常嘅都唔可以喺8關齋戒。咁啊，但係喺5戒裏邊咧，咁基本上上司話係唔係犯戒。Well, you said it's not a downfall of the vow, but does that come from the sutra or come from any?
If you want to be specific about it, for the sexual misconduct, lesbian sexual activity would probably not qualify as sexual misconduct according to the definitions that are given in the Vinaya and the Abhidharma. However, male homosexual activity probably would. So that there are, however, teachers who say that if you have 2 people who are in a committed, stable relationship, that prohibition against homosexual activity was primarily given the society of 2,600 years ago. We have a very different society now, and in the current world, you can make the argument that within the committed relationship, that it would not be sexual misconduct.
上司講啦，佢話係唔算犯戒，佢話但係如果喺女嘅同性戀者咧，即係 lesbian 咧係唔算。佢話但係如果喺男嘅同性戀者咧係算。因為佢係構成咗一 個性嘅動作係促成會犯戒，因為喺阿毗達摩律裏邊亦都有講過。咁就係如果兩個人無論佢係同性，即係佢男同男嘅同或者同女同女，如果佢係有一個承諾嘅關係裏邊咧，佢哋係唔算犯戒。咁佢亦都講過，佢話五戒咧係可以個別咁去受。當如果呢啲同性戀者唔清楚佢哋係咪犯戒，佢哋就最好唔好去受呢條戒。例如飲酒咁，我係中意飲酒嘅。咁如果你係中意飲酒，你咪唔好去受呢條戒咯。因為五戒係個別咁去受，可以逐條去受，但係要明白五戒係終生嘅。So what about masturbation? No,
not specifically mentioned.
Not specifically mentioned. 即係我問佢一個問題就係話，如果係自己去搞掂算唔算？咁但係佢話經冇講過。
Is a question about the lay precept, the killing part. It's assuming there's a doctor that is trying to do operation for a patient and to save his life. So, but in the event he incidentally do something wrong and then the patient die, so will it be a downfall? Or?
That would not be a downfall. And the reason it wouldn't be a downfall is that your intention is the intention to help. Killing would be if if you're doing the operation and decide, I don't like this person, that's killing. But if your motivation is, I'm trying to do something to help this sentient being, that help this person, then if they die because of an accident, that does not count. That is not killing.
咁頭先嗰位師兄就問，佢話關於喺呢個五戒裏邊，如果有一個醫生佢做一個手術，但係因為個手術失敗而呢個人死咗，算唔算犯戒？咁上司嘅答案就係話呢個人係唔算犯戒。所有構成殺生嘅行為係一定要有個動機喺背後。如果佢係因為唔中意呢個人，特登喺手術裏邊去做得唔好，令佢死亡，咁就算。永遠都係要有個動機喺背後去殺先至叫做犯戒。
So for killing, there are three factors. They have to die, it has to be intentional, and you're not making a mistake. In other words, you're killing the person that you intended to kill.
佢亦都講過喺呢個五戒裏邊有三個條件去構成一個殺生，就係話呢個人一定要死。第二係佢要有動機，第三佢係冇因為錯誤而殺錯人。
上司，我想問問咧，就嗰個菩薩戒咧，係咪守呢個戒咧？其實係一個 training， 一個訓練，係要嚟檢視自己嘅心。即係如果墮咗嘅話咧，係咪可以透過懺悔去繼續保守？係咪個重點係放喺即係檢定自己個心，係令到自己更加喺嗰個理解嗰個佛法空性或者禪定入邊咧，係令到自己更加進步。
He said the Bodhisattva vows. Actually, is it a training for ourselves? And if we have a downfall, can we just through confessions and just wipe off? And is it also to testify our mind?In order to see emptiness and to achieve that city.
It is, the Bodhisattva vow is primarily a vow for training ourselves, to train ourselves to work for the benefit of others, because that is the source of happiness for everyone, ourselves and others. So that is primarily the vow of training. Now,
okay, the first is that the Bodhisattva is actually a training, a training for our mind. But what if we have a downfall?Oh, yeah. Through confession, does that clean up?
So with the downfalls, unless your downfall is really severe, the Bodhisattva vow generally tends to bend without breaking. The confession and then retaking the vow will restore the Bodhisattva vow. If you have a really serious downfall of the Bodhisattva vow, for example, if you completely give up on sentient beings, not just sort of the minor of, temporary one, but if you really thoroughly give up on other sentient beings or give up on the vow completely, then you can retake the vow. You do have to confess it, and you can retake it. So if you have done a downfall and you feel like it's a really bad downfall, then doing a confession and then going to retake it from a lama would be very good. If you have a minor downfall, then doing the confession and maybe retaking it yourself in the presence of a statue would be fine.
嗱，咁基本上上次答咗你個問題，就係話係個菩薩戒基本上咧係我哋 對一個自心嘅一個訓練。咁嗱，例如我哋犯咗戒，我哋係可以透過懺悔而去還淨。咁啊，當我哋唔係犯咗啲好嚴重嘅戒律嘅時候呢，我哋係可以懺悔，跟住呢再受過呢個菩薩戒。但係如果喺一啲非常嚴重嘅犯戒呢，例如話我哋放棄眾生，即係捨菩提心。當然呢個捨菩提心唔講係永遠，可能係暫時性，可能你嗰排病或者心情好差，你放棄啲眾生，但係你仍然係可以透過懺悔去還淨。但係當你再去重受呢啲戒嘅時候呢，你應該係從一位具德嘅上師身上再去受過呢啲戒。Actually, it's not finished yet. And he also asked, is this the way to testify our mind in order to achieve emptiness?
Testify our mind.
你所講話係透過我哋嘅自心而去了解空性，係嘛？有啲咩？Okay. He said, after the Bodhisattva vows, we keep on checking our mind.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And how do we testify? Is that a way that leads you to achieve emptiness?
It is. We practice relative bodhicitta in order to achieve ultimate bodhicitta. But the relative bodhicitta is very important. Without the relative bodhicitta, you cannot realize emptiness. You have to have that love and compassion, that wish to do this for the benefit of all other sentient beings. Otherwise, any understanding of emptiness you have will just be conceptual. It won't be an actual understanding. So, taking the bodhisattva, having relative bodhicitta is very important and will lead you so that you will have the realization of emptiness and become a Buddha and achieve all of the wisdom, love, and power that is entailed with that.
咁首先你要明白，我哋係透過呢個相對菩提心，而去最終去達到呢個聖義菩提心，即係由世俗嘅菩提心去到出世間嘅菩提心。咁喺呢個過程裏邊呢，我哋係需要好多愛心同埋慈悲心去對待所有不同嘅眾生。咁係我哋係可以透過呢個程序去令到我哋去明白空性，甚至乎係證悟空性。咁但係所謂嘅空性唔係話單憑講咁簡單，係我哋實際上真係要去發一個好大嘅菩提心，而最終係可以達到悲智相運嘅時候呢，慈悲同智慧都具足嘅時候呢，我哋就係可以去證悟空性。呢個就係叫做出世間嘅菩提心。明唔明？唔明 ？Still don't understand.
If you want to, in other words, if you want to realize emptiness, first you need loving kindness. You need to want other beings to be happy. You need to have the compassion that wants to take all their suffering away from them. And then you got to think, well, how am I going to do this? The only way that we can do that is if we ourselves understand, really truly understand what causes the suffering, what causes the problems. And at this point, as ordinary sentient beings, we don't have that full understanding. Even with our partial understanding, we don't always know how to help other sentient beings do it. You might want to help someone when you're in a relationship with someone and you're with them. You know pretty well what that other person needs to do, but you don't know how to tell them so that they can actually do it. So the only way that we can really be able to help other people is if we can know their minds, know what they're thinking, and know what is an appropriate way to teach them. The only way we can do that is by becoming Buddhas ourselves.
咁首先你唔明，而家佢再解一次就係話我哋係需要好多仁慈嘅心、好多愛心、好多慈悲心，就係話我哋希望我咧喺眾生身上係令到佢哋嘅痛苦減輕，或者係甚至乎消除佢哋嘅痛苦。咁但係首先我哋要明白乜嘢帶嚟呢啲咁嘅痛苦咧？呢啲咁嘅咁好多時候我哋明明係見到好多眾生，佢哋係需要幫助，但係我哋唔知道點去幫佢，亦都唔知應該講啲乜嘢俾佢聽。咁喺呢個時候你自己都無能為力。但係唯一一個途徑係可以幫到佢，就係話你知道佢嘅心諗乜。但係我哋要知道眾生個心諗乜，我哋就一定要成佛，先至可以能夠咁做到。咁但係成佛，我哋係需要慈悲同智慧兩樣都具足，最終我哋先可以證悟空性。仲有一樣呢，我想講一講，就係你要有一個好強大嘅出離心，就係話你亦都覺得自己喺六道輪迴係苦嘅，你亦都唔希望呢啲眾生同你一樣喺六道輪迴係苦，你亦都希望佢哋有出離心。 所以你係要悲智相運，先至可以達到你所講要求嘅目的。
Okay, do you have one more question or
仲有冇問題？
or no? Yes, one. Okay, this will be the last question.
最後一
today.
條。
我想問下咧，守戒嘅時候咧，犯咗戒，懺悔，點樣知道懺悔懺到清淨咗啦？定係即係好似練3次咁啊，八字命就搞掂咁樣
？OK，
唔該晒。
She asked if she has a doubt on any vows. So how do you know? Through confession, she actually got cleaned up through confession, maybe 35 Buddhas or Doji Sampa. But how does she know she's being cleaned up?
You know that it has been purified if you have done it with the 4 powers. You do the confession. The first thing you need to do is you need to regret the downfall. The second thing is the second factor is you need to have a support whom you're making the confession, the presence of. So this would be like if you have a Buddha statue, the Buddha, you think this really is the Buddha and all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are listening and this is your support, or you can go to a Lama. The third is that you have to have an antidote, which is like 35 Buddhas practice or the Vajrasattva or whatever other confession you're doing. And you make a really heartfelt confession as you do it. With the 35 Buddha practice, it's saying, for all these that I've done, I regret them, I confess them, I admit them, I will never do them henceforth. So I admit them and really heartfelt, I admit this. And then the fourth aspect is the vow, I will never do this again. So the fourth is the resolve never to do them again. If when you make the confession with these 4 powers, then it will be effective. And it is said that no matter how great a misdeed you have done, if you do this, then it will be purified. So it does work, but you have to have these 4 powers.
咁啊，首先正如佢上個禮拜所講，我哋懺悔係要具足4種力量。第一種就係叫做遍行對治力，就係話我哋要喺對境，即係我哋可以喺屋企嘅佛壇有佛菩薩，亦都觀想虛空有無量嘅諸佛菩薩作為引證，或者我哋可以喺一個上師面前對佢懺悔。呢個第一種力就叫做遍行對治力。咁第二種力量呢，就係叫做善業之力，就係話我哋要透過某一種法門，令我哋可以還淨，去洗甩我哋嘅罪障。咁嗱，呢個法門可以係金剛薩埵，可以係四臂觀音、35佛都得。咁第三個條件呢，就係捨棄之力，就係話我哋係非常之後悔，我哋做咗咁嘅罪業，我哋一定要有一個好大嘅捨棄心。呢個就叫做捨棄之力。咁第四種力量呢，就叫做追悔力。追悔力就係話我好後悔，我以後唔會去做。呢個力量呢，就叫做不二過之力。其實顯宗亦都有講過一首偈，佢話罪福滿空由心造，佢話心若滅時罪亦亡，佢話心亡罪滅兩虛空，此則名為真懺悔，此則名為真甘露，復者當下自清涼。
Okay, thank you all very much.
多謝大家。
And we'll recite the dedication prayer on page 12.
大家一齊回向。